to turn it over to our moderator, Steve Averson, who will introduce the panel to discuss key legislation right here and right now.
Deborah, thank you. You're welcome. But we got to do a little something different here. Can you put your finger up in the air? Everybody, put your finger up in the air. Can you get ready to do this? Can I get a send? Yes! Oh, yes. That's what it's about. David, where's David? Did he leave already? He's on fire, probably. Someone go put it out, wherever he is. Thank you for doing that. So grateful. Okay, we have a great panel. We're gonna. We hold up your sign there. See, this panel is succinct, and they're not just going to help us be confident. They're going to give us some succinct insights that we can use to press send ourselves to friends, neighbors, and what have you, to activate and to support what they're doing over there. Okay? A week ago, I was at a wedding. It was a Jewish wedding. You know how they break the glass in the wedding? Well, the rabbi blew me away. I've been to a couple of these before, never heard this before. The rabbi blew me away. He said, I'm putting this glass inside this pouch. And I'm challenging you and you to the bride and groom. You got to take all the love that's in this room. And when this glass gets shattered, that's our broken world. And it's your job, husband and wife, to bring this world back together, to heal, to bring these pieces together. That's what we're going to do. And these four people right here are doing that for us every single day. You can't pay them enough money to do it. Will you please come forward, Senator Tiara Mack, please. Senator Megan Hamilton, come on up. Representative. Who's going to go? Who's going to go? Jason, get up here, please. Jason Knight. My own rep, Jim Speaker, come on up here. They are in the trenches. They're doing the stuff we talk about and we hope about and we expect can happen in our state. Oh, we've got a special state, we're leading the way, but it's hard. It's not happening. And so I want each of them to talk about the latest thing, briefly, the latest nugget that they're working on, they're hopeful about, and we're going to come back and ask them more questions about what we can do to help them accomplish that. Megan, start with you.
Good morning. Thanks for having us. I'm going to talk very briefly about one of the steps that we can take to decarbonize our economy. Rhode Island, a couple of years ago, passed very aggressive climate legislation, and in fact, if the entire world were committed to the same thing that Rhode Island was committed to, we actually would be in okay shape, right? Like averting catastrophic climate change. Go Rhode Island. We should be really proud of that. That said, now we have the work to do to get ourselves there. So the bill that I'm going to talk about that's on your priority list is something I'm very honored to sponsor. It's called the Building Decarbonization Act. Basically, 40% of Rhode Island's emissions come from big buildings, right? These big old leaky buildings, we have old buildings, we have things like the State House or the prison or even just, these triple deckers. I represent Providence and Pawtucket, and they leak air and heat and all kinds of other things. So the Building Decarbonization Act is basically a pathway to get our buildings to net zero over the course of a number of years. And it's a little bit complicated and in the weeds, but the short version is that bill passed the Senate last year, got stuck in the House. Lamentably, we're hoping that this is the year that we can get it all the way through. Let's hear it for the House. This is actually for those of you who are interested in kind of getting in the weeds. Like there's all kinds of nerdy climate policy stuff to get into. So if you ever want to talk about that, go find folks at Carrier. You can come talk to me. But that is the thing that I am putting my shoulder into over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. We'll be back in a minute, Senator Mack.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon. One of the things that I am really excited about is our state has committed to building housing because we are the 50th. We are ranked 50th in building housing to meet our state's needs. But in terms, yes, I heard a couple places out there. But one of the things that we have not focused on in terms of matching our building goals is also protecting tenants. There are several pieces of legislation this year that will help protect tenants because as we continue to build, we'll continue to see more and more people across the state. 40% of Rhode Islanders are renters, and in Providence, where I represent, 60% of my constituents in the city are also renters. So things like just cause evictions will will help create more legislative action for protecting folks who are renters and build a stronger relationship between landlords and tenants, increasing more protection. But then also we have some key legislation to help protect our immigrant communities, which will help ban, which is already banned at the federal level and the state level, asking for immigration status for folks. So there's a couple of key things that while we're thinking about building, which is super critical to making sure that we can keep prices down, we also need to make sure that our tenants have the rights, the recourse, and the tools they have to make sure that no matter where they live in our state, they're protected by both our state government and our laws that will ensure that our housing is safe, quality, and abundant for all people.
Thank you, Senator Mack. Representative Hunt.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming out to make a better Rhode Island. Your General Assembly has been engaged in a long-term effort to tighten up our gun laws. In the last few years, we have banned domestic abusers from owning firearms. We have gotten rid of, where we have outlawed straw purchases, where somebody goes in and buys a bunch of guns and then sells them to folks who shouldn't have them. We've had high-capacity magazine bans. We've improved background checks. We've created a red flag law, which I guarantee you has saved lives in the state of Rhode Island since it was passed only a few years ago. The next big hurdle is an assault weapons ban. You can have a pistol, a firearm, shotgun for home defense. The Second Amendment is there. It is black letter law. But you don't need these weapons to accomplish that. And they are the preferred weapons of mass shooters. And there's no reason for them to be in circulation in our community. So that's a bill that I'm proud to sponsor this year and have in the years past. And I think this year, the momentum is towards getting that to a vote. I'm very excited.
Thank you, Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all. I have a lot to say about housing, but I'm going to hold on that because I do want to talk a little bit about the bottle bill. It doesn't have a bill number yet, but it is about to be introduced next week by Representative McEntee and I think Senator that's right, McKinney. No? But anyways, there was a commission that was a year and a half. They studied the issue for a year and a half, and they came up with some very sound research-based best practices regulations to, and I appreciate your glasses and your cloth napkins and all of that. That's the direction we need to go. And so watch for the bottle bill, and it's got some resistance from the business community, so we need your help moving that across the finish line. Thank you.
Awesome. Hold the microphone. Hold the microphone. Give me one really good reason why I should, with all this stuff going on, why the bottle bill? Why should I look forward to that? Why should I apply for it?
Well, the practical reason, I guess, well, there are two practical reasons. One is that the central landfill will be at capacity in less than 20 years, I think. And the other is that we have too much plastic in our environment, and the bottle bill will bring that down a fair bit. Good?
Thank you. Yeah, awesome. Jason, hold on that microphone there for a second. You've been fighting the fight for a while. And we know that Rhode Islanders support the idea. We know that a great majority of the senators support the idea. What makes you hopeful that we're an inch closer to the finish line?
Well, it's, you can't take the politics out of politics. And the fact of the matter is that there's been soft support for this bill for ages. But there's always been something else that you could do that was maybe a little less controversial, that's maybe going to scratch the gun safety itch in any given session. And those things are just not on the menu because we've already done them. We've done them. And we need to, but this is a significant hole in our protection. We are the one state, we have Connecticut on one side with assault weapons ban, we have Massachusetts on the other side with assault weapons ban. You can still buy them here, you can traffic those to other states. If we want to make an own little corner of southeastern New England where it's hard to get a hold, really hard to get a hold of an assault weapon, God forbid, and do something bad with it, we have that ability. And the politics just points to it because it's like water going through a funnel, right? It's just, there's no place else for that political energy to go other than this bill this year.
Okay, thank you.
And I do want to say one other thing, just real quick.
Please, you take two other things.
The stuff that seems little, or maybe in the grand scheme of things, when you pick up the paper, you look at the New York Times, and like every hour the world is going to hell in a handbag, which can be tremendously demoralizing. The fact of the matter is, in this era, in any other era, it doesn't matter who's president, it doesn't matter what's happening, when there's been improvement in our lives because of improvements in our governmental structures, it happens one step at a time, and oftentimes it's a baby step. It's just a little, it's like when I sit with my kids and put together Legos, right? They're long since past Lego age, but I'm not. But it's like one brick on one brick on one brick. And all of a sudden you have this huge, like, I don't know, Hogwarts castle or whatever it is. This is how it happens. And the only way it happens is if people get out there and make effort to put those little bricks together to make something enduring and to build better things. Bad times will come and go. Hopefully this bad time will go as quickly as possible, maybe in 3.5 years. But don't give up the faith on the little stuff, because the little stuff is the only thing that really lasts.
Thank you. Senator Mack, and both of you I know are keenly involved in a bunch of things, the next two of you. But in terms of affordable housing, what is a specific nugget that is on the horizon that we ought to focus on in terms of, pinching our friends and our neighbors and our representatives?
So one of the bills that I am also championing in the State House is the minimum lot size bill. And this sounds like it's kind of technical and in the weeds, but you should be able to build a home of any size, especially a starter home, whether it is a townhome or an ADU, which passed last year, on a smaller lot size than what you currently have. This will allow us to build in more places, more abundantly, and build in neighborhoods where there is space. A lot of folks have pushed back on this, but when I walk around in my neighborhood, there are already several homes that don't conform to the zone that's already there. Small, tiny cottages, small townhomes, the perfect starter homes, homes that don't have a backyard, homes that have a smaller front yard. All of these things are filling into what we currently have, because this is Rhode Island. It's the smallest state for a reason, and we take that with pride. But we also know that there is a ton of places that we can fill in to meet our housing goals, especially in the places that have the most transport, that have the most jobs, that have the most walkability, so that no matter where you are, whether you're someone who wants to downsize from a home because you're an empty nester, whether you're someone who's moving to this state because you have a job that's going to be able to pay you a living wage in a city that you can afford, that you should be able to have access to a home that might be smaller than other homes. And this will allow us to meet our really aggressive building goals of meeting the thousands of homes, tens of thousands of homes that Rhode Island's behind. So that's one of the affordable housing bills that I think we can get across the finish line this year.
Awesome.
Oh, that is a great question that I do not know.
Okay, here's what we're going to do. Someone's going to look it up. She's going to pass the baton to Megan. And Megan, I'm going to throw you go ahead, shout it out.
House Bill 5964.
Awesome. Now, Senator Coleman, I'm going to throw you a curveball.
I like curveballs.
You do? Okay, good. Let's see if you do. All right. Sister Elizabeth Bernadette, in 7th grade, made us do debate. And she said, what do you want to talk about? And we all raised our hand. And she gave us the opposite thing. So if you were against capital punishment, you had to talk about why capital punishment was a good idea. So help us understand the lay of the land from the other person's point of view, the landlords, the municipalities that want to protect their town and make it just right. We don't want to bring in just this kind of housing, but different kind of housing.
I'm building decarb around housing.
Say again?
I'm building decarbonization around housing.
Housing.
Housing, great, yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a term, it's not a great term, it's called NIMBYism, which is it stands for not in my backyard. So the objections that we hear are like threefold. Typically, so the state of Rhode Island is actually for 30 and change years had a requirement on the books that every city and town have a minimum of 10% affordable housing. And it's 6 towns that have met that currently. So this has been, most of Senator Mack's and my life, we have been actually obligated to do this, and we have failed to do it. And so a number of years ago, right around the time that Senator Mack and I joined the Senate and Speaker Shekarchi assumed speakership, we got a lot of energy around housing. But frankly, the municipalities are not always a super fan of that. They're like, they say things like, it ought to be up to cities and towns where and how we permit housing, where and how we permit density. Which is, again, an argument that in theory I can appreciate it. if it weren't for the fact that we are 30 years behind the times on the construction of housing. So there are some objections that come kind of from that dimension, right, where there's like levels of governance. I guess the other thing I will say here is that city and town councils are often sort of structurally designed to be responsive to neighbors who don't like development ideas, but they're also not responsible for solving the problem, right? So they are able to kill proposals or projects, but they are not on the hook for meeting the need in some other way. So there's a bit of an imbalance between whose job is what. So that's one thing. There is, I think, a fear of density in a way that I think we frankly need to get over for a lot of reasons. One, walkability really matters in an era of rising electricity prices, rising gas prices, like climate goals. We need to be developing our cities and town centers in ways that are sensible and that support people being well and being mobile, regardless of whether or not they are drivers, because that time is coming for all of us, right? It happened to all of us when we were children, and it will happen to all of us towards the end of our lives. Even if you can drive now, there's tons of people who can't drive during the bulk of their life for a series of reasons. So we need to be smart about that, and I think there are, I was with Senator Mack and I heard a presentation from the Pew Center on Thursday last week, and they had some really interesting data about the people who come out to oppose housing developments are actually really not representative, generally speaking, of how people feel about housing developments. And so one is make your voices heard in favor of stuff, right? Things change. We have to, either we can drive that train, right, or the train can drive us, but one way or another, we need to, things are going to change and we need to be involved. And then, so I think there's density, I think there's some issues around I don't want to change the character of the neighborhood. The thing to note about that, though, is that, nobody's bulldozing existing houses. That's not what this is about, right? What it is, I live on a double lot, for instance. And so, as with the passage of last year's ADU bill, I now have a mechanism if I so choose. My mother actually announced to me, kind of casually, she's like, oh yeah, my stepfather, Bruce, his name is Bruce. She's like, well, I'll probably outlive Bruce, and then I'm going to move in with you. And I was like, hell you are. but those are we have tools for ourselves to help people age in place, right? To help people who are coming out of college or starting them. I could build something like that doesn't change the character of the neighborhood because my house is on a double lot and I should be able to do that very easily. So Senator Mack was talking a bit about things like that. And so when we design for the future, we have to be both sort of present to our present, but there are a couple of other proposals floating around in the legislature right now, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, that converts or sort of helps hasten the development of residential units in commercial zones. So I live in Kentucky, I see a couple of constituents out here, and there's a strip mall, right? And you could build on top of the strip mall if the assuming that the architecture works, right? There are ways that we can add density to places that are somewhat undense, right? And so thinking creatively about that, and those are actually proposals that I think have gotten a lot more positive energy lately.
Would you pass the baton down to June?
Yes.
Thank you. June, I know this is something you care about too, and I wonder if you can illuminate for me one of those little wiggle room steps forward that has taken place for municipalities that Senator Felag introduced in terms of, getting your credit for the 10%, giving wiggle room to municipalities so that they can at least say, okay, what we're trying to do with Section 8. I don't know if you're completely in tune with that or approve of it or aware of it.
No.
Okay.
So, the getting to the 10% has become this sort of horrific goal that communities resist. And I would like to take attention away from the 10% and just focus on building units for people so they can afford to pay no more than 30% of their income. So we have some proposals to include other kinds of units to bring down the cost of housing. Manufactured homes, which aren't appropriate for every neighborhood. That's what we used to call those mobile homes. Prefabricated homes, which the parts come in on a truck and you put them together like Legos on your lot. That brings down the cost. Senator Coleman and I are working on a bill for a land bank, which would make much better use of public lands. And we really need to find a way to bring the cost of housing down, as opposed to messing with the formula for counting up to the 10%. The new Department of Housing has a different way of counting success, which gives each community a goal for a number of units as opposed to a percent. And the problem with the 10% is that it's unreachable for many communities. If you're building market rate units in the community, you're kind of chasing the 10%, and it's not workable for many communities. So I think we need to shift the paradigm for encouraging communities to reach their goal of providing abundant and affordable housing for all of our neighbors and friends. And we're talking about us. We're talking about CNAs and police officers and daycare workers. These are not people from New York. I don't know what happened to New York, but it's the people from New York that everyone's afraid of. Sometimes Connecticut. But, so we really do need to work on bringing down the costs, and there are so many ways of doing it. You've heard of some of these tools already.
Jason, I'm going to get you in a second. Back to Senator Mack for a quick second. I'm not sure who gets responsibility for this, but you mentioned New York, you mentioned Connecticut. I guess you're talking about outsiders who come in and purchase. My sister is a real estate broker in California, and fully 15% of the homes in the town that she features are unoccupied, owned by people not just out of the town, not out of the state, but out of the country. I don't know how big a problem we have here, but there is a proposal to levy a tax on the non-owner occupied houses. Talk about that if you can.
Yeah, there have been a couple of proposals, and I believe there's still an active study commission in the House for Airbnbs. And in the city of Providence, there is also an ordinance that will allow, and I believe the governor put it in his budget last year, that Airbnbs or short-term rentals is what they're generally called. It's not with Airbnbs. It can be verbos, it can be beach houses that are used for a certain part of the year, don't currently pay the same taxes as hotels. And effectively, they are the same as a hotel. I think the current rate is 5% for those homes, and the hotel tax is about 7%. So increasing that tax is going to bring millions of dollars to the state budget, and municipalities all across the state, including in South County and also Providence, have also increased that tax to make sure that that money is going to either a revolving fund to pay for more housing to be created, so millions of more dollars in our economy to reach our housing goals, because housing is expensive to build, and with the conversation around tariffs, it's going to be even more expensive to purchase the materials that we need to build. So that's one critical resource. And then two, disincentivizing housing that is not for Rhode Island residents. We want people to have the opportunity to be able to have secondary income, especially as the cost continues to rise. But we also want to make sure that housing in Rhode Island is for Rhode Islanders, is not seen first as a source of income for folks who are either not in our state or outside of our state. And then again, as we continue to build our housing stock, we need to ensure that renters are protected, because we know that someone could charge $1,100 a week in some cases for a home to be rented, and they could charge $1,500 to $1,800, which is about the minimum rent size for a month. So they're getting more money from people coming out of state, but that is disincentivizing them to use those homes for Rhode Islanders as their main residence. So we want to make sure that while we understand private property rights, which is the common pushback for folks to tax short-term rentals or to disincentivize short-term rentals in our communities, we know that we're in a housing crisis. Again, Rhode Island is 50th in building housing for the last 30 years. So we've got tens of thousands of units that we need, and we need to preserve all of our current housing stock so that folks aren't fighting to get the available housing stock, because that's what really is driving the costs up for everyone. If you looked at what either your home is valued at today, or if you looked at trying to buy a home because you want to downsize, the prices are out of this world. People are paying $500,000 on average, or close to $500,000 on average for a home in Rhode Island that many people who bought 20 and 30 years ago paid $80,000 for. And so for a starter home, for people who are on fixed incomes, and in a state where the median income is about $45,000 for the average family, that is, the numbers do not number and the math does not math in order for a family or even folks who want to downsize to be able to sell their existing home and then purchase something that makes sense. And so these are some of the tools that we can use. Housing is quote unquote complicated. Housing is not complicated, it just has a lot of parts, and it's something that we've neglected for years. We have a history in this country of not looking at housing as first a human right. We have a history of seeing housing as an investment or as a commodity, and as we see people come from New York, from Boston, and from even overseas in some cases, we see them purchasing in our communities, making them more expensive, pushing people out, gentrifying neighborhoods, and causing a crisis in where can people in our states live? Where do our teachers live? Where do our CNAs live? Where do our firefighters live? Where do the people who are the bedrock of our communities, who work at our grocery stores, who work in our public transit, where do they have an opportunity to live if all of our housing stock is being purchased by outside investors? And as again, we see we're on the precipice of potentially, I think, the 4th recession in our lifetime, or at least my lifetime. There might be more for some of y'all out there. As we see ourselves at the precipice of another potential recession, housing costs are going to continue to rise, and we're going to see the investors who have the capital right now, as opposed to the real people on the ground that do not have the capital, purchase more and more, drive up the cost more and more, displace our neighbors, displace our communities, and really change the fabric of Rhode Island. And so when people say they don't want their neighborhoods to change because there are these NIMBYs that we're talking about, because they don't want houses built on a minimum lot size, or they don't want ADUs, they're going to see their neighborhoods inherently change when it's bought up by private equity, when it's brought up by people who have $25 million plus portfolios of housing in their communities that they don't know. And then they're going to wake up one day and they're going to find that almost everyone in their neighborhood is an out-of-towner, or someone who doesn't have the 20-year plan of staying in Rhode Island, being a Rhode Islander, or paying into their schools.
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate it. Give it to Representative Knight. I'm going to ask you to do a twist, just like I asked Senator Coleman a moment ago. But first, I want to just kind of put in real terms the numbers here. According to the Washington, D.C. based nonprofit, shortage of affordable homes in the country, 46,341 extremely low-income households are our neighbors here in Rhode Island. But there are only 21,662 affordable rental homes. So that means that Rhode Island has just 47 affordable rental homes for every 100 households with extremely low incomes. So how do we tell and sell these kinds of disparities without demonizing the other? How do we let our neighbor know, yeah, it's okay to be a landlord, it's okay to be a gun owner, but we need to find common ground on certain big issues. So we were chatting beforehand. Jason, would you talk about one little nugget in the legislation that's changed ever so slightly, so the current gun owners in the state are not governed by potential legislation will pass?
Sure. So generally speaking, I'm going to try to get into this with just enough detail to tell the story you're wanting me to tell without getting waylaid. So an assault weapons ban, the actual words on the page is really technical, because we have to, in order to have something that can be enforceable, you have to get right down to the nitty-gritty, and you have to talk about the parts of weapons and the things. A lot of, if you're a gun person, you know, right? But if you're not, you're not. Who knows, how many people in the room. I imagine there's a scattering few of you who know what a muzzle brake is and know the difference between, fully auto and semi-auto, and know what I'm talking about when I talk about, an accessory rail versus a barrel shroud, that kind of thing. The legislation gets way down deep into that stuff. And part of the initial legislation that went in really contemplated this idea of, all right, if this actually happens, we don't want to take the guns that are in the closets now, because it's probably going to create some Fifth Amendment issues, right? You can't, the government, the Constitution says you can't take someone's private property without compensating them. If you all of a sudden make these weapons that can cost anywhere between $1,500 or even up to like $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 once you get all the accessories tacked onto them, and you say they are all illegal starting today, they are all contraband, that could be a serious takings issue. So we don't want to make a legislation that does that. What we want to do is make legislation that next year there's less of these weapons in the community. 5 years down the road, there's even less. 10 years down the road, it's even less. And eventually, it's terribly difficult to get your hands on one. So we set up this system where we said, all right, if you have an AR-15 in your closet, for whatever reason, you can keep it, right? But if, after the date of the ban, something happens and that weapon comes to the attention of the police, how do they know it's legal? and like a legacy weapon, if you will, or if it's new and therefore contraband. So we set up a registry system where you would go down to the police station and you would say, I'm Joe Smith, I have an AR-15 in the closet, here's the serial number, and then you would get a piece of paper that says it's legit, you keep it with the weapon, you're good to go. And in the initial legislation, the state police would have a copy so that you could, if something ever bad happened, you could compare the two copies. Well, folks didn't like that, right? There is a serious strain of thought, and there's a serious strain of thought again. I'm going to try to
We got time, don't worry about it. We got 10 minutes.
Serious strain of thought in America, and I'm fully familiar with this. I mean, I grew up in Idaho. I grew up in a red state. I was in the service. I get it that the reason why the Second Amendment exists is to prevent against tyranny somehow coming into play in the United States. So when you come up with a law that says, oh, by the way, you who own a firearm and do so in part because of this mythos around protecting against citizens, protecting against tyranny, I want you to tell the cops where that weapon is, and I want you to give us your name and to tell us exactly where you keep it in your house. There are many people out there who objected to such a thing. I call it a registry. They thought it was the first step towards complete confiscation. Now, no one's talking about that, but that's what the thought is on the other side. So, in response to that, and in response, like I said, you can't take the politics out of politics. Politicians are very susceptible to pressure, and many of my colleagues who are in favor of this, but they don't want to like take a beating in the back alley from some of their constituents that care about this stuff, figuratively, not literally. They said, is there something we can do about this? And in response, we're working on what's called a substitute. We're basically amending the bill now to create a different kind of system that accomplishes what we want to accomplish, which is to identify legacy weapons so that nobody gets arrested for that because you can keep it prior to the ban date, but it doesn't require you to have any interaction at all with the government in order to confirm your right to own a legacy weapon. And I could totally get into details for hours, but that is the legislative process in action. There's a bunch of other things that are happening to the bill which are kind of smaller, but as an example, there's a target competition shooting community in the state who said, you know what, the Olympic level pistols that we use, which are really weird looking, specialized guns, would fall into this weapons ban. Nobody's going to use it. When you get down and you start looking at them, nobody's going to use this for a mass shooting, right? They'll hold maybe 3, 4, 5 22 caliber pistols at a pop, but because they take a magazine outside the handle, they would be covered under the statute. I didn't know about this, right? And I've been shooting guns since I was a kid, but they came to the committee, and we talked about it, and we're carving that out of the bill in response to this community input that we've gotten on this particular issue. So it's the legislative process really does work. You really can start at A and get to B sometimes for the right kind of thing.
Yes.
And that's the answer to your story. That's how
I
there's a
realize
little
that,
tweak on the registry issue.
and I appreciate your succinct ability to say, here's progress. It's a step forward that might comfort certain constituents, certain neighbors, and will get us across the finish line, which is important. All right, thank you, Kathy, for our heads up. We will be done on time. You will get a break at 2:05. You will stretch your legs, etc. You guys will get to go on to the other important things on your Sunday. I'm grateful. I'd like to give each of you one last chance, starting with June, to give us a nugget, a takeaway that you hope that we can jump up and down and get excited about in the coming year.
Excited, maybe not, but I have two things. One is about things that you can do at the local level about housing. Join your zoning and planning boards. Talk to our friends at Neighbors Welcome back there, and they can tell you how you at the local level can integrate the principles that Senator Collins, Senator Mapp talked about gentle density and appropriate building. But we need your voices at the local zoning and planning boards, because the study that Senator Coleman referred to about the bias on planning boards, that's real. And Alex Horowitz is the researcher's name, look that up. My second thing is we haven't mentioned healthcare yet, and we are in a crisis. We're in a housing crisis and we're in a healthcare crisis in Rhode Island. Anchor, 25,000 patients shutting down. We heard a bill on Health and Human Services the other night, I can't remember the number, sorry about that, about the 340B program, which requires pharma to pay. It's a complicated, of course, because that's how we roll, but it requires pharma to subsidize the operations of our federally qualified health centers like Thunder Mist. That program needs to be maintained, and it is under threat. It's a federal program, again, that requires pharma to help subsidize these centers. So hearing from you on that is really important, and hearing from you, as Rep. Knight said, matters. We get your letters, we read your letters, we let our leadership know how much we have heard from our constituents. So keep those cards and letters coming. And again, healthcare, Medicaid, 30% of Rhode Islanders are on Medicaid, 50% of Rhode Island children are on Medicaid. That program is under threat at the federal level, and it's a lot of money. That's the thing that scares me the most right now.
Thank you. Hold on. Gentle density, send. Thunder Mist must be maintained. Send. Thank you.
And I would just say that I think it's easy to get, if I just laid out a piece of paper and sat here for 10 minutes and thought about all the things that I care about that we touch on in the General Assembly, I have a list that would just be overwhelming. Today it's guns, tomorrow it's housing, it's our troubled healthcare system, it's the plastics in the bay, it's the plastics in our body, it's the PFAS in the firefighter gear, is, oh my God, do we have enough teachers, do we have enough cops, what am I going to, CNAs, I can't get them in the nursing homes, and the nursing homes are, the private equity stealing money out of the nursing homes that they own, all of that. Big deep breath. Pick one thing that you can get into, that you can be knowledgeable about, and you can apply that pressure that I talked about to your local reps, your local senators, the reps and the senators to sit on those committees. And let's talk about the person nobody's mentioned so far, the governor and his staff, your federal delegation. If you just do the one thing, maybe you can push that ball up the hill an inch, and maybe with your neighbors, you can push the ball up the hill another few inches, or perhaps get it to the top and to the other side. Whatever the issue is, don't lose faith that actually matters and helps. At the end of the day, what Ben Franklin said, a republic, if you can keep it, when you engage in the process of civics like I'm describing, you are doing your part to keep it. And I just ask, keep the faith, it will get better.
Awesome. Deep breath. Choose one thing. Send.
One thing I didn't mention today is consumer protection, specifically for low-income Rhode Islanders. I know one of the priorities of this congregation is the payday loan and banning payday loans. That's also a priority of the Rhode Island Black, Latino, and AAPI caucus. This is year 14 or 15 that we've been trying to push that bill forward. This year, we have the big banks on board. Since 2018, almost every single big bank, 6 out of 8, this is Bank of America, this is Wells Fargo, and there are 4 other ones I can't think of at the top of my head, now have payday loans between $500 and $1,500 that you can get out at below 20%. Payday loans right now are over 200% in Rhode Island. Our big banks have stepped up since 2018 to create programs that make it easier for low-income people to establish credit and get out of predatory practices which put them in a line of debt. These payday lendings don't exist in communities that look like this. They exist in communities that look like mine. They exist in Providence, in the South Side, that keep low-income people who are renters, which paying your rent does not build your credit. These are folks who buy used cars, cash only, or on payment plans that don't build their credit. These are folks who go to payday loans, get a predatory loan for $1,000, they end up paying $5,000 on that doesn't build their credit. Our big banks have already created programs that allow them to build credit, allow them to create established credit relationships with credit unions in Rhode Island. Navigant has a program, Bay Coast has a program. So keeping Rhode Island business in Rhode Island for Rhode Islanders at a cost that makes sense is one of the biggest things we can protect consumers in our state. And that is the hill I'm going to die on this year on top of housing and affordability.
Don't die. You got 2 minutes. Big companies, you can make money. But our neighbors are not going to suffer payday loan without good legislation. Thank you. Send.
I got two things. The first is that if you do not know your personal state senators and state representatives, please fix that. Please fix that, right? Because getting emails, I get 450 emails a day, right? Getting emails matters, and I keep a little tally of like, please pass the assault weapons ban. Like those matter, but it matters much more when all of the people who work in the State House can say, oh, hey, I ran into Nancy the other day. And like when Nancy calls me, because Nancy happens to be an expert on whatever, and she says, hey, I have some input about this bill. Can I get your ear? Then you have a process by which the community's voice gets integrated into lawmaking. So what I'm saying is that showing up to testify is great. It's also insufficient. So be there when you can in like personal relationship. This is a small state, right? Like everybody lives. My district is like 2.5 miles wide because it's quite dense. So like everybody can walk from one end to the other if you actually needed to. Districts like this are slightly bigger, but my point is that your community representatives live in your community. They should be easy to find. And the second thing is, so I'm a professor during the day. June and I actually both are. I'm a sociologist, but I've been on this kick for like the last week. Hannah Arendt was a philosopher. She wrote a book in 1951 called The Origins of Totalitarianism. She's trying to explain like why Stalin and Lenin, like why they can like get the kind of energy that they got, and we're obviously living through very similar times. And one of her conclusions, and this has been borne out again and again by research, is that when people are isolated and alienated, they are much more susceptible to extremism and to villainizing other people. So, thing number one, please meet your neighbors. Please meet your neighbors. If there's somebody new across the street, bring them some cookies, right? If there's somebody you haven't seen for a while, go knock on their door, do a wellness check, have a dinner, whatever it is that you do. But when we are together, we are stronger. When we are isolated, we are much weaker, and there's a lot more ugly toeholds that ugliness can get in. So let's make sure that does not happen. That is the foundation of everything that we do.
Thank you very much. Will you please stand up for these four sitting down right now? Thank you very much, you guys. Appreciate it so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.